Core Set 2021 is shaping up to be an awesome set. Amazing cards keep rolling in. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. Thought you might appreciate a video where I wasn't playing the horn at the beginning, although I did consider starting out the video with, "This card is on fire!" But I decided to not do so. Now, we are here today to talk about a brand new spoiler card from Core 2021. And man, am I very much digging the flavor of 2021. Let's be real. For the last little bit, Ikoria, Theros, we've been kind of light on the good times, it feels like, especially with like story and everything. I actually just found, and this is an unrelated note to the spoiler from today, but overall related to 2021, I found out that they have this big, long article talking about the origins of Basri the Planeswalker. So we're going to talk about that one day. But either way, it feels like 2021 has had more effort put into it, and I am very much enjoying what I'm seeing. So all that being said, let us dive in. We're going to start with the spoiler card today, all right? So we're looking at the Incinerator, Chandra's Incinerator more specifically. So this is 1 red and 5 for a 6/6 elemental. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total amount of non-combat damage dealt to your opponents this turn. And the trample is also tacked on there, because why not? Whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that player controls. And that's all on a 6/6 body. That's some fat beef right there. So I wanted to break it down and talk about some older Magic cards that kind of tie in to the concept behind this card, and then we'll come back and talk about the flavor, the aesthetics of it, all of that. But first of all, I want to talk about the first ability here, which is this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the amount, the total amount of non-combat damage dealt to your opponents this turn. Now, first off, when it comes to this non-combat damage style, that is something that's newer to Magic the Gathering. There aren't a lot of red cards that specifically say non-combat damage. I think one of the most famous examples of cards that do say non-combat damage would actually, oh, it's actually another Chandra's card, Chandra Spitfire. It's funny, I get so used to just using the second half of the name, like Spitfire, I'll call this Incinerator, that I forget about the Chandra part slapped on it because everybody has different things named after them. Honestly, Chandra's Incinerator isn't the hottest name. You know, Chandra Spitfire works a little bit better. And you know, this is a 1/3 flyer for 3 that gets a power boost every time you deal non-combat damage, as opposed to specifically needing to use like an instant or sorcery. There are other ways to do it because there are creatures that have activated abilities that tap to do damage. There's a number of ways to do non-combat damage in Magic the Gathering. So Chandra Spitfire up until this point to me would have been the easiest to point to as a non-combat style card. But now that this card exists, the Incinerator, which actually mentions non-combat damage twice and seems more focused around it, this will probably be my new go-to example of a non-combat focused red card, right? And this kind of a concept makes perfect sense for red. This, by the way, since we're talking about the Spitfire, I really enjoy the artwork of the Spitfire, where it's a phoenix that's just literally made out of elemental flame. Instead of being a phoenix itself, it's just like living fire emulating a phoenix. And that's a pretty cool concept for real. But really when it comes to the first ability, with the whole caring about making the spell cost less mana to put out based on the non-combat damage, that's pretty cool in terms of accelerating the card as well, right? It's going to allow you, basically, you're going to be able to, let's say you can cast a spell that for 1 mana does 3 damage to a target. Well, if you have 3 more mana, Chandra's Incinerator just got discounted by 3. So that actually, one of the first cards, or no, it was the first card. I was trying to think, was it Furnace or the Elemental? Either way, War Elemental was the first card that came to mind when I thought about similar concepts in Magic's past. Now understand, let me tell you what the card does, and then I'll explain the connection. So War Elemental is 3 red for a 1/1. When it comes into play, you sacrifice it unless an opponent was dealt damage this turn. And whenever damage is dealt to an opponent, put that many +1/+1 counters on War Elemental. Now, at first blush, just at the power level of the card, you may think to yourself, ooh, yikes, this isn't very good. You mean I have to do damage to my opponent, then put this card out, and then hope to get a boost from it, right? Well, not really, because most of the burn for red is instant speed. So what you can technically do is cast the War Elemental, and then while the trigger's on the stack saying, sack it unless someone took damage, you can do damage in response to the trigger. So if I put down a War Elemental, and then I go ahead and play an instant that does 2 damage to you while it's coming to play triggers on the stack, when the trigger goes to resolve, it will actually say, oh, you've actually met the conditions of doing damage. You don't have to sacrifice this card. And on top of that, the War Elemental will get the boost from that burn spell as well. So you could actually, basically, War Elemental technically almost cost more than 3 mana to cast because you have to have another spell to cast to work with it, but it also comes out beefier. But either way, this to me is kind of like leading up to Chandra's Incinerator, in that Chandra's Incinerator gets cheaper and cares about you, like doing damage to your opponent, non-combat damage to your opponent, so that it can come into play. Now, admittedly, obviously with the War Elemental, it's not as picky. You could have swung with creatures earlier in the turn as well. There is that option. So it's not exactly the same thing, but when I thought of coming into play, being tied to damage, and the fact that it made the card cheaper, that it all just kind of led me to War Elemental. So it's not a perfect connection, but it's connected enough that I wanted to talk about it. And the artwork on War Elemental is absolutely amazing, man. You can see that it's literally like made up of all of the shields and spears, like Chandra's Incinerator is made out of pure fire, maybe a little bit of rage, but pure fire, right? This is actually made up of equipment, the gear that is used. You know what I mean? In terms of the whole battle concept. So I always thought War Elemental was a really neat card conceptually. So when you tie in the other part, because there's another card that I mentioned that ties into this as well for me, and that card is Furnace of Wrath. Now, Furnace of Wrath ties into the second ability on Incinerator, the big ability. Obviously, Trample is technically the second ability on the card, but whatever, man. I'm used to Trample being at the top. Now, the second ability is whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that player controls. Now that made me think of Furnace of Wrath. Again, this is a more like not direct comparison, but you'll be able to see where I was going with this when I explain it out for you. Furnace of Wrath is an actual really old school Magic card that's 3 red and 1 for an enchantment that doubles all damage assigned to any creature or player. They may have updated it to actually include planeswalkers as well, because obviously this existed before planeswalkers. I imagine Furnace of Wrath's updated wording is something along the lines of double all damage that would be dealt to any target, or to any from any source. All sources deal double damage, something like that. But either way, this whole Furnace is obviously a equal effect where both you and your opponent benefit from it. And I'm not trying to say that the Incinerator's ability is the same, but in terms of if you do 5 damage through non-combat damage, then you're going to get an extra 5 damage out of the Incinerator targeting either a player or a creature, which is like doubling the damage that you're doing. So in some ways it acts as a one-sided, limited Furnace of Wrath. Furnace of Wrath has such weird artwork, doesn't it? You can see like what looks like kind of like magmatic flows, and there's these gigantic stone pillars with metal coils hugging them, and it looks like lightning is arcing into the weatherlight. I am not 100%. I've never understood what was going on in this artwork. Is it supposed to be like there's 2 lightning bolts in the artwork now, and that's what the furnace is? It's old weird art, but it is funky to see old weatherlight artwork, right? I mean, that is definitely some nostalgia for me. Now, when it comes to more recent cards, there is a creature that is a fair comparison to the Chandra's Incinerator, and that is the Satyr Fire Dancer. That's 1 red and 1 for a 1/1 enchantment creature, and whenever an instant or sorcery spell you control deals damage to an opponent, Satyr Fire Dancer deals that much damage to target creature that player controls. And so for me, this is up till now, this is how you would expect to see most red, like, we're going to get to do extra damage abilities. They care about instants and sorceries or red sources. That tends to be the case. But Chandra's Incinerator only cares about non-combat damage. It doesn't care that it's a red spell. It doesn't care that it's an instant or a sorcery. So in a way, it's freeing itself up to be more monocolor friendly. You know what I mean? And the Satyr Fire Dancer is not great. It's 2 mana for a 1/1, right? Whereas the Incinerator has that gigantic beefcake body on top of the ability that actually won't just hit creatures. It can also hit planeswalkers as well. So that's pretty amazing in terms of like an upgrade. And if you manage to do non-combat damage beforehand, Chandra's Incinerator can easily be as cheap to put out as the Fire Dancer. So for me, the Incinerator feels like pretty much a straight upgrade. Is this the kind of card that's going to like dominate standard, something like that? I doubt it. I doubt it. But you never know. Sometimes cards that end up making a difference genuinely surprise me. And maybe there's more potential in that regard than I thought. But either way, the idea behind this card is really cool. Is it tied into multiple old cards for me? The flavor of this card is absolutely fantastic. First of all, let's talk about the frame for a moment. Because if you take a look at the frame, you can see that the casting cost is done in white text, which is not normal. These have very much like an FNM promo kind of feel to it, but more specifically, they actually seem to be copying the signature spellbook. I did a video on Chandra's signature spellbook recently, and the frames here with the back that feels like the card's actually on fire, and the lines of flame that reach across the card to kind of, it almost looks like 2 arms of flame reaching in with 2 fiery hands and putting their hand around the actual expansion symbol. And weirdly enough, it's got like a circular, it's got, not expansion symbol, I should say, the hollow stamp, the anti-counterfeiting measure. So that's circular on this card. So I don't know if for M21, they're taking all the Planeswalker associated cards and giving them their own special treatments for like masterpieces. Is that what we're looking at? Each of the Planeswalkers will have the cards tied to them specifically, because we did see when I did the video talking about Basri that the cat had some interesting frame artwork going on. And I wondered about that at the time, but it does seem highly likely to me at this point that we're looking at a scenario where the masterpieces are going to be enhanced Planeswalker connected cards. I don't know if there'll be other things as well, but that is what it feels like. Now, when we turn to the art, oh my God, I absolutely love this artwork. There's so much to enjoy. Obviously, the first thing that catches your eye is the actual Incinerator itself. It has like, you know the second Terminator movie where you have the dude and he's made of liquid metal? It's got kind of that vibe with like arms that, it's got a humanoid form to begin with, but it has the equivalent of like spikes for arms, and it has like a serpentine tail, almost like a snake person, you know? So you've got a vaguely humanoid body, which just gives it it makes it feel like it's more sentient than if it was just a raging ball of fire, right? And there is this really dark black smoke that is just coming up of every inch. You know what I mean? You can see it. There's a streak left in between where the body is most narrow to kind of show you the sky contrasting in the back. But mostly it's this inky black darkness that is just pouring off of this Incinerator as it burns everything. I mean, look underneath it. It almost looks like it's making like the mountainous area under it bubble up. Like it's essentially, the way it looks to me is it's almost converting the rock underneath, melting it into lava, right? It kind of gives that feel of like hot magma lava rocks that have cooled somewhat around it. And just, dude, the intensity of that black smoke is insane. And so you've got this vibrant creature made of pure fire, and it's contrasted against a cool and lifeless expanse. I mean, look at the background. You can tell this is nighttime, clearly from the moon that is right there behind the incinerator. And you can see mountain ranges. The whole like purple and blue and light gray vibe of this makes it feel like a very cool environment. Like if you were out there, you would feel a chill, which would be kind of nice with the weather we're having right now. But either way, you would feel a chill. And I like the fact that there are 0 signs of life anywhere in this artwork. It makes me think of you're wandering through like some canyons late at night, and all of a sudden you notice like off in the distance a little, there's a light. You're like, what is that, a campfire? And you move a little further and you see this being made of pure fire. At first you might think, oh, is that actually somebody in need of aid? Is that someone who has been set alight? And then as you stared more at it, you would realize that it's only vaguely humanoid. Yes, it has the torso and the head and the upper arms of a human. But the further down you go, the more snake-like it becomes with these gigantic pointed, like essentially blades of fire for arms. And at that point, maybe you realize it's a moment too late as this comes barreling down the mountainside at you. Or I mean, it is an elemental made of fire. I assume it could just leap and swan dive down upon you point first, right? I mean, fire can't get injured from a fall, you know what I mean? So in that kind of a scenario, it's just, dude, the flavor of this is absolutely epic. The artistic choice to make this fiery, vibrant, alive elemental set against what feels like a cold and dead kind of land, just, it's very, very evocative, at least to me. I am curious to hear what you think about all this, so let me know in the comments below. If you enjoy what I'm doing here, this channel is fan-funded, so go ahead and jump on my Patreon if you want to help out what I'm doing. Thanks for coming by, everybody, and I'll see you all very soon.